Adam, The Ghosts of Culloden Moor, Book 11. Written by Cathy McRae. Narrated by Andrew McDermott and Jen McGurk. Chapter 1. I listened to Sonny as she challenged the others around me. The night was dark, the unearthly fire casting a greenish glow that lit our ghostly faces. To a man they crowded about her, our sweet young witch, eager to hear how they could accomplish their revenge.
Each of you can face a hale and hearty prince, if that is your wish.
What we wish. How many times over the past 270 years had we heard of the feelings of our bonny Prince Charlie, the young pretender? How he'd ignored the advice of his more experienced commanders, marched his starving and exhausted army through the snow on a dark night for a surprise attack that never happened. As proud as we all were to fight for his cause, every man among us would give anything for a chance alone with the prince to express his disappointment, frustration, ire. Except me. Sonny drifted about the group, inserting a soft word here, a laugh or a gentle touch there. We were all a bit nervous as our numbers dwindled, one by one. For years I'd simply been known as number 22, though I believed that to indicate the order in which we'd risen the first time after the bloody battle. My name is Adam Patrick Gordon, though few but myself remembered it. I thought of Sonny's bargain. Men who had spent the better part of almost 3 centuries wandering the moor and sleeping in the mud were now given the chance to become a hero and win the boon of their lifetime. It was something most, if not all of us, had dreamed of many times over the years. I'd turned my own grief toward the prince more than once. This restless non-life was no way to spend eternity, though we'd seen amazing things during our time here at Culloden battlefield, as it grew from a bit of marshy land enriched with the blood of braw Scottish warriors to a visitor centre where people came to witness the end of Prince Charlie's dreams. And I'd witnessed many changes, from horses to cars, from the written and spoken word to voices issuing from small, hand-held devices, and even raised an eyebrow from time to time at the peculiar changes in clothing. I turned back to the moment at hand. The last of the 79 milled about, eager to be gone. Around me, the men joked softly, shared remembrances, boasted of how they'd take care of the bonny prince. A few had already disappeared into their chance to become a hero, and then to speak a few words to our doomed leader before settling forever beneath the moor and whatever reward awaited us. I turned my gaze into the green fire and tried to shut out the unrelenting voices in my head. Once again I heard those life-changing words echo, the words that had driven me to despair. Even had I returned unscathed from battle, my world would have never been the same. The night closed about me, the velvet sky twinkling with stars that hadn't changed in nearly 300 years. Fingers made feather-soft contact with my arm, and I jumped in surprise. It wasn't normal to feel things, not the touch of another anyway. Memories and regrets were another thing, and I had had far too many years of them. Sonny's touch startled me, and I eyed her curiously. She stood beside me near the fire.
You seem sombre, Adam. Are you not ready to have your say?
She gave me a winsome look. Over the years, she'd grown from a bonny bairn to a sweet lass who'd stolen our hearts, and her ability to bring a smile to each of our faces had grown. But this time, it wasn't in me. My heart was too heavy. There was more than the loss of a battle and all of Prince Charlie's plans for me to regret. She took my hands and turned me toward her.
Why so glum, Adam Gordon? You're a braw man. You cannae fail your test.
'Tisnae the test I worry about. I was damned before I ever fell at Culloden. She tilted her head, clearly surprised.
Suppose you tell me about it.
I'd bottled up my grief, my anger, and my self-recriminations too long. I'd fought well and done my duty, and never confided to a soul. Yet the compassion from this slip of a lass nearly did me in. I struggle for breath to form the words. I'm responsible for the death of my wife and child. It was her turn to look startled.
Would you explain, please?
Her grip on my hands tightened. I ducked my head as others turned in our direction. 'Twas nae by my hand, but because I wasnae there to protect them.
I'd like to hear about it. It clearly has you undone.
Her eyes rounded with sympathy, and suddenly the memory broke free. Words I'd shoved to the back of my mind tumbled over themselves in the unexpected chance to share my grief. The too familiar guilt lay on the surface, but I no longer felt consumed, torn between duty and family. I remembered the day Major General John Gordon rode into Strathbogie on his grey Highland pony, still exultant from the Jacobite win over the English at Falkirk in January. He was a craggy man, his aged body twisted with rheumatism, but still a terrifying leader. 'Twas said a raid planned by government forces had cried off due to a mere rumour that he and his men were in the area. The joke was his name alone gave King George nightmares. The reality was he'd pressed every able-bodied man in the area to the cause, and I was among them. 'Twas the night before the march to Culloden. We were down to our last bit of food, hoping the supply wagons would show up the next day. A young lad rode into camp, but we paid little attention. 'Twas nae uncommon for new recruits to show up unannounced, nor was it very uncommon for us to lose a man the same way, slipping quietly from camp. It had been a hard winter, and the small respite after the victory at Falkirk in January of '46 had done little to raise morale. I'd left my sweet wife expecting our burn when Major General John Gordon of Glenbucket rode through our land in March, gathering men for the Glenbucket Brigade. Proud I was to support the Prince, but reluctant to leave Mairi with her so close to her time. But the harvest had been poor, the winter lean, and the Major General promised good pay. A bitter smile threatened my lips, still ashamed I'd been unable to provide for my wife. My Mairi knew what the extra money would mean to us. She told me not to worry. She'd have the burn ready for me to dangle on my knee when I returned. Sonny shook her head.
And you never returned?
Nay, that's nae it. The lad who rode into camp that night had a message for me from my brother's wife. 2 days earlier, my sweet Mairi had heard the dog barking furiously and saw the hole in the barn where a couple of sheep had escaped. Though 'twas bitterly cold, the loss of a sheep meant the loss of wool, lambs and coin, and she set out to help the dog retrieve them. She slipped on the ice and landed hard. Her labour started early, and by the time she was found the next day, the babe was dead, and Mairi wasn't far from it. I could not choke out the next words.
She died as well.
I nodded, too heartsick to speak. Even after all these years, the loss of my Mairi struck me hard. She had been my heart, my life. To hear of her death while I was away still cut me to the quick. I wanted to believe someday our spirits would find each other, but I had lingered here on Mossy Moor, restless and unable to settle my guilt, unable to regain in death the family I lost in life. Sonny gripped my hands hard.
How is this your fault, Adam Gordon? Falling isn't something you could prevent. You didn't cause her death.
I rounded on her. I admit it, but my eyes were hazed with tears, and each word pulled something loose in my heart. You didn't understand. The bloody sheep escaped through a hole in the side of the barn. I'd always meant to repair it, but it just became another thing to do once I was home again. If I'd been more caring, if I'd spent one more day at home. Sonny jerked my hands, cutting off my words.
You are not to blame. You must believe me.
I could only nod for her benefit, not mine. I'd watched the Burns with their families at the visitor centre since it opened in 2007. Jolly Burns, cranky ones late for their naps, whining ones tired or hungry, wee lads and lassies on chubby legs, older ones galloping about the place with the energy of a cavalry charge. The pull of these youngsters remained strong, yet I had no descendants, no great-great-great-grandchildren to visit me here, and despite Sonny's well-meant words, it was entirely my fault.
Adam, if you could have one wish, any wish at all, what would it be?
That wasn't a difficult question. I had my answer ready. I'd truly thought of little else these many years. I looked her square in the eye. To go back for one more day with Mairi and fix that damn hole. Sonny paused, considering my request.
If you receive your wish, you must remember you have but one day, perhaps two at the most, to perform your heroic act. No matter the outcome, you'll move on at the end of your time.
I trembled with anticipation, my stomach awash with a fear I'd nae felt before. What if she could nae allow it? What if the thing I wanted most in this existence wasn't possible? Can you do that, lass? Can you give me time? To protect Mairi is all I ask. I dinna care what becomes of me. She gave me a sorrowful look.
This isn't about avoiding your fate. You're one of the 79, and will always be so. 'Tis your one chance to prove yourself.
I nodded, my throat thick with emotion. How I longed to live out my life with Mairi, though I knew it couldn't be. But I would give anything at all, including my chance to have a discussion with our bonny prince, to be able to avert her fate. She deserved better than to die alone on a cold night, bursting her burn. I wanted the power to make that happen for her. With a nod, Sonny brought my hands together before her, then gently pushed me back toward the fire. I stumbled, my body suddenly heavy, my feet scrambling against the soft soil of the moor. I flinched as a thudding I'd not felt in 270 years began again in my chest, and warmth fired outward through my arms and legs. I stared at Sonny in wonder, but her face was already fading, dissolving into the green mists. I revelled in the strength returning to my body. I felt young again, invincible, like the 20-year-old I'd been who'd left horse and wife to accomplish great things in Scotland's honour. The green glow of the fire faded to a pinpoint, then vanished altogether. Bitter cold stung sharp as a slap as snowflakes grazed my cheeks. I glanced about in the darkness, the waning moon casting its glimmer on the snow. To my left, I could hear the river as it toiled against its frozen banks. Ahead, I could see a light in the window of the stone and thatched cottage my wife and I called home. To my right loomed the barn, The hole in the corner a dark stain on the wood beneath the pale light of the moon. I drew a deep breath of cold, clear air. The noxious fumes from the 21st century had vanished. The smell of peat smoke hung heavy on the breeze, mingling with the odour of sheep. Tears pricked the backs of my eyes. Sonny had done it. She had granted my wish. I was home. Chapter 2. Barking erupted from inside the house.
Paul, be quiet.
I grinned to hear Mairi's voice as she scolded the dog, but Paul took no notice of her, and I heard the collie's toenails scratch the wood as she leapt against the door.
Fine. Out with you then.
The door opened, and Paul bolted outside. For a moment, Mairi stood silhouetted in the doorway, one hand clutching a shawl about her shoulders, the firelight glowing gold behind her. Her figure was bulkier than I remembered, pushing her gown to its limits about her belly, and she'd never looked more beautiful. Paul's black and white form streaked across the yard. She launched herself at me, tail wagging furiously, half expecting the dog to pass right through me, as things tend to do when ye are a ghost. I was taken off guard when her furry body landed solidly against mine. Taking a step back in the snow to recover my balance, I reached out with both hands and caught her wiry frame. "Easy, lass. I'm glad to see ye too." Paul rubbed against my legs, whining happily. I tried to pet her, but she leapt and rolled and wallowed about me in her excitement. I fisted my hands on my hips and gave her my sternest glare. "Paul, sit." She plopped her furry behind on the ground in front of me, her tail swiping a wide path behind her in the snow. Ears perked forward, eyes intense as she stared expectantly at me. I revelled in her intelligence. We had been close, she and I, before I left for war. Her herding instinct was second to none, a boast I'd occasionally won a wager on, and her ability to outthink me was uncanny. I grinned at her, and the game was on. Up, she rose on her hind legs, her front feet gently paddling the air for balance. Turn about. Still on her rear legs, she hopped up and down until she described a complete circle. Down. She collapsed instantly to the ground, her head flat on her paws. I knew it would take a second command to budge her from the spot. Crawl. Raising her furry rump ever so slightly, she crept toward me. Stop. She froze. Back up. She slithered backward. Halt. She stopped. I knelt on the ground and motioned her forward. With a happy whine, she lunged into my arms, and we fell to the ground, wrestling as though it had only been yesterday since we'd last been together. 3 weeks for her, 270 years for me. Mairi appeared in the doorway, staring into the darkness.
Paul? Where are you, lass?
I climbed to my feet, dusting the snow from my breeches and coat. "Best get back to the house, Paul. We didn't want to keep our Mairi waiting." I strode to the house, Paul galloping beside me. Mairi stared at me, eyes wide, her hand to her throat.
Adam Gordon, is that you?
My grin spread wider than my face. I was that glad to see my pretty wife. I swept her into an embrace, my arms straining around her as I hugged her close. She'd always been such a tiny thing, a wee lass against my height, but the swell of the burn almost doubled her size. I tucked my face against her neck and breathed in the smell of her, content to just hold her as I fought back on manly tears. After a moment, I released her. I grinned. Aye, and who else does your mangy dog welcome home at night? She cradled the curve of my cheek in her palm.
Dinna say such things, Adam. You know you alone have my heart. Och, I have missed you so.
Her hand came to rest on her bulging stomach, and a shy smile crossed her face.
You'd scarce know me. I've gotten that big since you've been gone.
A blast of cold wind nipped at my backside, and I shooed her in the door. Get inside, wife. I'll not have you taking a chill. I'll ask you to take better care of yourself and the burn than that. Memory of the missive I had received skittered through me. It will nae come to pass. Sonny gave me my heart's desire, and I will nae allow harm to befall Mairi or the burn. We went inside and closed the door, leaving the cold night air behind. The fire in the hearth was banked for the night, but warmth still lingered in the glowing embers. Mairi waddled to a chair by the table and collapsed onto its seat. She reached for my hand, twining her fingers through mine as she pulled me close.
Is it really you, Adam? I'm nae dreaming. I do often dream of you, that is.
I knelt beside her, and she smoothed her hand over my hair. "'Tis really me, my love. You're not dreaming." And to prove it, I kissed her long and tenderly. She trembled and wrapped her arms about my neck. She pressed her face against my chest, and I felt her tears through my shirt. I lifted her in my arms and took her seat, cradling her in my lap. We sat like this for a long while, and I even crooned snippets of a tune in the back of my throat as I rocked her gently. Before I'd left home, we were constantly touching, as though 'twas difficult to exist beyond each other's reach. To have her in my arms again was the most wonderful feeling in the world. Chapter 3. She nestled against me.
Why are you here? Is the war over so soon? I hadn't heard.
Nay, the war isn't over. There's still a battle to be fought. Only one, and it wouldn't end well. She lifted her head from my shoulder and peered at me.
Are you on leave?
There was no way to tell her the truth of how I knew the danger of the unmended hole in the barn, or how I came to be here. So I shrugged. I've been needing to fix that hole in the barn, you know. Now seemed like a good time. She tapped my shoulder playfully.
You didn't fix the barn in the year we were married, and now you think to stop an entire war to board it up?
I shifted her in my lap, aware of the difference in her. Her lissom body now heavy with child, the solidity of the burn she nurtured beneath her heart, and I loved every bit of it. Guilt flashed through me to see her so happy, knowing I would soon be gone forever. But I would cherish this day and give her and the burn a chance at life with no regrets. I chucked her beneath her chin. War or no, I'll take care of my Mairi. She tucked her head beneath my chin.
I'm so glad to see you, Adam. I'm so proud of the man you are. So honourable and willing to do your part for Scotland. But it hasn't been easy wondering about you. Selfishly wishing you weren't one of those who'd answered Glenbucket's call.
To be honest, I'd had little choice. Old John Gordon had ridden into Strathbogie, pressing every available man to his regiment. At the Culloden Visitor Centre, centuries later, I'd learned he and Lords Lovett and Lockgill and the MacDonald chieftains, along with a few others, had escaped the carnage at Culloden and gathered at the head of Loch Arkaig, hoping to relaunch the 45. But the Scots army never rallied, and John Gordon died in Boulogne, France, 5 years later. Few of the soldiers in Glenbucket's regiment died that day at Culloden, but I had been one of the unlucky ones. Mairi and I held each other close as the glow from the fire dwindled, and a chill crept into the house. I nibbled her ear, and she giggled, providing all the warmth I needed to ignore the waning block of peat. We murmured words of endearment to each other, reminding me poignantly of the night before I left with Glenbucket's regiment. That hadn't turned out so well, but tomorrow I would make amends. With a brief kiss to the top of my nose, Mairi finally slid to her feet.
You must be hungry. I've never known you not to be. And you're looking a bit gaunt, Mr. Gordon.
One hand braced on her lower back, she crossed the room to our small larder. I reached for her in protest. Mairi, I'm fine, truly I am. Dinna fash about me. Indeed, I'd not eaten a bite in nearly 300 years, but why bring that up? My job was to keep her safe, not alarm her. Perhaps it was best she think me on leave from my unit, allow her to believe, at least for now, I was really coming home one day. But how to convince my wife I didn't need to be fed? She rummaged through the shelves.
There's spannocks in this tin, and a bit of dried mutton. And William drew water for me just this evening.
My brother's lad, William, was old enough to do small chores for her, but she'd clearly not thought to hand the lad hammer and nails and repair the barn. And, to be fair, I hadn't considered it either. Mairi ignored my protest and bustled about the room as well as she could, presenting me a small platter of food alongside a mug of cold water. I used to drink ale, but Mairi didn't have a taste for it in the past few months of her pregnancy, and apparently didn't keep it around just on the off chance I'd show up on her doorstep. But it didn't matter now. I stared at the platter, considering the food before me. If I ate it, would it go down? How real was I? If Paul's greeting was anything to judge by, I was fairly solid. But I didn't want to risk alarming my poor wife over such a small thing as swallowing food. She yawned. I jumped at the distraction. Oh, here, go get some rest. I can only stay a day to set things to right. The sun will be up soon, and I must get busy. I'll be fine here with Paul. Her face paled.
Only a day?
I rose to my feet and hugged her as she swayed. Disappointment and exhaustion etched on her pretty face. I tried to remember Sonny's words. Mayhap too, but I cannae be sure. You look tired, Mairi. Grey, please, go to bed.
Will you not come with me? I want to lay my head on your shoulder. Listen to your heartbeat.
I stiffened. I hadn't had a heartbeat in a very long time. But this night I could feel its scenting blood pounding through my veins. Veins that had once bled dry from a mortar shell after it severed a vital artery. Let me see to this food, and I'll be there. She smiled contentedly as I led her to our bed in the only other room in the house and tucked her in. The hand-woven wool blankets she'd brought to our home when we'd wed were soft and warm, and I pulled 3 atop her, then tucked them in. I kissed her forehead. Sweet dreams, my sweet Mairi.
I'll wait up for you.
But I knew she wouldn't. Already her eyelids were heavy, and she stifled another yawn. I patted her shoulder and tiptoed from the room, coming to an abrupt halt when I saw Sonny seated at the table, her black robe pulled around her. Chapter 4. I glanced at Paul, who lay curled at the door, unconcerned about the stranger in our midst. Sonny followed my gaze.
Dinna worry, she willna notice me.
She looked past me into the darkened bedroom.
Nor will your wife, should she wake.
I didn't understand, but accepted this along with everything else that had happened to me in the past few hours. I pulled out the other chair and sat. Sonny pointed to the platter.
You may as well feed it to the dog. No aspersions on your wife's cooking, mind. But you're a ghost, and canna eat as the rest of us.
I sent her a startled look, and she laughed softly.
I got you here as you wished. The rest is details which I canna control.
With a sorrowful glance at the bannocks. Mairi was a wonderful cook. I dismissed them from my mind. Sonny looked about her.
'Tis a lovely cottage, and your wife is quite beautiful. When are you going to tell her you're a ghost?
I stared at her, then leaned back in my chair, resting my hands on my breeches, feeling defeated. I cannae.
How will you get everything done tomorrow if you dinna tell her?
What do you mean? Sonny held up a hand, ticking her points off her fingers as she spoke.
She'll want to fix you a hearty breakfast, then send word to your brother's family, then invite them to sup with you. Mayhap even make a ceilidh of it.
Her eyebrows rose.
You dinna want that to happen.
The thought of all those people around me left a hard knot in my stomach. On the one hand, I wanted this day alone with my wife, and it was sorrowful enough to leave her again, knowing I'd never return. On the other hand, I shuddered to think of all I knew from the visitor centre at Culloden about the aftermath of the war. How could I face my family and not plead with them to travel to America immediately, flee the terrible atrocities of the butcher's reprisals against so many innocents? I didn't know how the people here fared, for the Gordon clan was torn in its loyalties. The third Duke of Gordon sided with the English, but his brother, Lord Lewis Gordon, had raised 2 battalions and fought on the Jacobite side at Culloden. It would be well known many men in Strathbogie served the Jacobite cause. How many could I save? Who would listen? Such a task was enormous, and not the one Sonny had sent me to accomplish. I thought of my wife. She's a staunch Catholic. A faint grin lighted Sonny's eyes.
Then mayhap she believes in spirits.
I frowned. Dinna take this lightly. I could shock her deeply, and she doesn't need that. You saw how far she is with child. I came to prevent the burn from coming early, not frighten her into labour.
Adam, you must think of a way to tell her. Otherwise, she will nae understand why you dinna want friends or family, or her fantastic cooking.
She cocked her head to one side.
You dinna want her to think poorly of you.
Does this happen to all ghosts? Not being able to eat, I mean. A green aura surrounded her, and her figure began to fade.
Nay, Adam, it doesn't.
I was alone at the table. I stared at the platter full of my wife's good cooking. Do you want a bite, Paul? The dog scrambled to her feet and daintily took the bannock I offered. She carried it back to her rug at the door and laid it between her forefeet. Unused to largesse directly from the table, she nosed it about, biting it gingerly, then dropping it back to the floor. Dinna waste it. Remembering the newly empty pantry, I carefully replaced the rest of the food. By the time I looked back at Paul, her bannock was gone. Chapter 5. I woke to the smell of breakfast cooking. Damn, I'd meant to be up before Mairi, bring her breakfast in bed, and claim I'd eaten earlier. But I'd not had such a contented sleep since my awakening years ago. 'Twas refreshing, if unlooked for, much better than sporadic bouts of rest on the moor with the lingering odours of battle clogging my nose. I'd fallen not long before the government dragoons facing us had given up exchanging fire across a stretch of ponds and moor, and someone had led me gently aside. Many nights I'd stared at the stars through ghostly eyes, dreaming, wondering, longing, imagining I would lay awake all night with Mairi in my arms. I'd gone to bed willingly after Sonny left, but it hadn't taken long for my eyes to close as peacefulness invaded my very being. And now she was wasting perfectly good food on her ghost of a husband. Much as I hated it, Sonny was right. We needed to have a talk. I'd soon be gone, and with my death, there'd be no money forthcoming to restock the larder. I imagined Mairi tending the garden with a newborn straining her energy, and realised I needed to stop her efforts of depleting the larder on my behalf. I quickly rose and pulled on my breeches, tucking my shirt-tail in as I hurried into the other room. Morning light glinted off the lingering snow outside, and flashed with clear winter brilliance through our one-paned window. Mairi greeted me so brightly I could swear the sun shone from her face. She glowed with happiness, and I ached to think what it would be like to remain with her and never let her lose that beautiful smile. My love for her resonated as a deep ache inside, an ache that stretched across the centuries, one I would never willingly release. But first things first, I crossed the room and captured her in a fierce hug. She squealed with delight and twisted in my arms until she could put hers around my waist. It was odd to feel her swollen belly between us. Something thumped against my abdomen, and I jumped. Mairi laughed. She grabbed my hand and held it to her belly. Wonderment bloomed through me. I'd felt the burn move before, but this was so much more. Do it again, I urged, and the barn gave another solid kick. I believe he's wanting out, I preened, proud to think I had a part in the barn's making, pushing aside the reality that I'd never see him. But Mairi would. That had to be enough. Mairi laughed.
Or she.
We'd had this discussion before. I hugged her again. Lad or lass, it doesnae matter to me. I choked back a lump in my throat. I just want ye both safe.
You've mentioned it often enough. 'Twill likely be a lad.
Ye cannae make it so just by saying it. But I was wrong. I'd wanted to return to help Mairi. I'd said it, demanded it, fashed over it again and again for the past 270 years to be exact, and it had finally happened. I was here, and I was about to change Mairi and the barn's destiny. Mairi waved her spoon at me.
Go let Paul in from a run. Breakfast is almost ready.
I had a moment to gather my thoughts. Touching Mairi's belly, feeling the burn move inside, was as close as I would ever get to holding my child, and it had to be enough to know he, or she, was alive and kicking. I must get busy in order to keep him that way. I opened the door, and the crisp morning air touched my face, raising goosebumps along my skin. Sunshine glinted off the slowly melting snow, decorating the faceted surface with tiny rainbows of colour. Dark purple shadows still hid beneath the trees, but they were fading, giving up their space to the new day. I didn't know if I'd ever felt more alive. Every smell exploded in the back of my nose, creating a new taste on my tongue. Every sight formed a memory I would never forget, or would I? Paul, her furry black and white form, dashed across the glen and darted past me into the house. She skidded to a halt at Mairi's feet. Mairi turned, a plate of fresh bannocks in her hands, and spied the dog's eager stare.
Get by, dog. You know you didn't get food from my platters.
I sent Paul an apologetic look, and she responded with one of expectancy. Later, I mouthed at her. She placed a paw over one eye and looked away. Mairi added the plate of bannocks to the table.
Och, Adam, I'm so glad you're here. Wee William will be here later this morning and I can send word back with him.
Mairi filled the platter before me. Plump oatcakes nestled beside a few rounds of bacon from the pig I'd killed months earlier.
Here you go, Macreeja. You dinna look as though the army knows how to feed its soldiers.
She placed a kiss on my ear as I reluctantly sat, then bustled about the room, one hand absently stroking her big belly. Wait, send word with William about what? Mairi, what are you on about? What's this about William, and why do you not sit with me?
Och, I'd a bite earlier. 'Tis difficult to eat much at a time. The bairn takes up that much room.
She waved airily and averted her gaze, a sure sign she didn't want to continue the conversation, then shuffled into the bedroom. I wondered how much a bite was, fairly certain it wasn't enough to feed her and the bairn. She needed the food on my platter much more than I did. Mairi, come eat this right now. I made my voice as stern as possible, as guilt poured over me at the short rations she lived on at the very end of winter. Her voice came from the other room.
I'll eat a bit more later.
She plumped the bed pillows with a resounding thump.
I'll have William tell his ma you're home. Even if 'tis only for a day or so, they'll be glad to see you.
She appeared in the doorway, hands busy folding a blanket.
Do you know if Alan is home on leave as well?
I startled at the mention of my brother, instantly transported back to the day of battle. A stray shard of an exploding mortar nicked an artery in my neck, ending my life quickly, and I never saw my brother, a veteran of Lord Lewis Gordon's regiment, again. I'd no idea what had become of him. His regiment was on the opposite end of the battlefield from Glenbucket's, but I knew he wasn't one of the 79, nor was he currently home on leave. Nay, Mairi, I dinna think Alan is home, and I dinna wish to invite the family here. I must be away by nightfall, and I dinna wish to share my time with you. I had no idea if I would be granted extra time or not, but I felt safer telling Mairi 'twas just the one day.
Only the day?
I saw her stricken face, though I'd warned her the night before. My heart broke to remember I would never see her again after this day, but saving her life and that of the bairn would be the balm I would carry to whatever awaited me beyond. She'd received word of my death soon enough, and I wanted to spend this time with her, basking in the warmth of her smile. I crossed the room and caught her chin in my palm. Dinna fash, Mairi. Just think of all the chores I can do for ye that ye havena gotten to this past weeks. I'm sure you've a long list for me. She brushed my hand away, a frown on her face, and I knew she didn't like my teasing this time.
Had I known you were coming, I could have prepared a list for you. As it is, Paul and I have been getting by.
Dinna be angry with me, I begged. 'Tis our last day together. Damn, I didn't mean to say that. Aunt Mairi pounced on it hard. Chapter 6.
What do you mean our last day?
Her voice shot upward, face pale. I shouldn't have said that. I let out a frustrated sigh. 'Tis difficult being a ghost around people who can see you. No one paid any attention to us at the visitor centre, though we followed them around often enough. I'd said pretty much whatever I wanted for far too long, and if ever there was a time to watch what I said, this was it. And I had just failed. Her eyes widened.
But you did? What do you know, Adam Gordon? What are you nae telling me?
I tried to calm her, but nothing worked. Tears flowed down her face and she stomped her foot. I gave her a stern look. Please have a care for the burn, Mairi. Getting upset like this isn't good for either of ye.
What have you done, Adam?
Anger lit the delicate green of her eyes. Behind me, Paul whined. I gave in with a sigh. Taking Mary's hand, I led her across the room, pulling a chair out for her from the table. She acquiesced, but the glint of stubbornness remained. Paul hid beneath the table with a faint growl and a furtive look at me. Mary, I'm nae here on leave from the army. She stormed to her feet.
You aren't a deserter, Adam Gordon. 'Tis not in you. I tell you, Paul and I will be fine. Hie yourself back right this instant. They will nae have missed you yet.
She pointed firmly to the door. A deserter? The thought hadn't crossed my mind. It surprised me Mary had thought of it. Could that have been what Sonny meant when she said Mary would think poorly of me? I hadn't been especially eager to go to war, but I believed in giving Prince Charlie his chance, and when I left home in March 1746, things had looked good for the Jacobite army. But no matter the circumstances, I wouldn't have deserted, and Mary knew it as God's own truth. I'm nae a deserter. She nodded briskly.
Of course you aren't. No one would ever think it of you. I know you worry about me and the bairn, but 'tis not worth your good name to come fix a simple hole in the barn that has been there.
Mary, I interrupted her tirade, my voice slightly raised to be heard. Mary, can we just forget this? I worried about her, about the harm to the bairn if I told her I'd died a few days from now on Culloden Moor. Not for all Sonny's warning would I willingly bring harm to my sweet wife. She opened her mouth, but a shout from the yard cut her short. I'm here, Auntie Mary. What do you need done this day? She turned stricken eyes on me.
William is here. Quick, hide in the bedroom.
I wasn't sure he could see me. I hadn't thought to ask Sonny if I would only be visible to Mary and Paul, and Mary obviously didn't want to involve our nephew in my supposedly questionable activities, so I slid from my seat and slipped behind the bedroom door, viewing the room from the crack between door and frame. Mary cast a worried look my way, and I sighed. She turned to the cottage door, opening it to William's ruddy face. "Hello, Auntie. Ma said to give you these." He handed Mary a small basket covered with a piece of cloth. She accepted it and patted William's head.
Tell your ma thank you for me. You hear?
She placed the basket on the table behind her and made shooing motions with her hands.
I didn't need anything today. You were a big help to me yesterday, and I can't think of a thing for you to do now. Head back home, lad. I'm sure you could be a help to your ma.
William scowled and scuffed his boots on the doorstep. "Ma can always find work for me. I like it here with ye and Paul." He craned his neck, looking into the house past Mary. "Where's Paul?" Paul had followed me from her spot beneath the table, and now crouched near my feet, watching me warily. I couldn't explain the dog's sudden distrust of me. Had she caught the whiff of death? I didn't know the exact day, but it was likely no more than a few days before Culloden, judging by Mairi's size and the feel of the air. It didn't have the frozen bite of March any more, but the softness of April and spring. My death was mayhap only 2 or 3 days away, and 'tis said dogs are sensitive about such things. "There you are, lass." William scooted past Mairi into the house. "Come on, Paul, what are you doing?" He reached out to the dog, but froze as his gaze met mine. Could there be a slight chance he didn't remember me? After 270 years it seemed possible. But nay, it had only been 3 weeks or so for him, and recognition dawned bright in his eyes. "Uncle Adam, what are you doing here, and hiding behind the door?" Chapter 7. His face reddened, and his look turned doubtful. "Does your captain know you're here?" I gave him a stern look. Aye, I didn't desert. In truth, my captain was many years dead, and didn't care where I was at the moment. I tossed Mairi a firm gaze as well, but she remained sceptical. I turned back to William. I knew of a few chores I hadn't finished before I left, and it seemed like 'twas a good day to get them done. I motioned him away and strolled into the main room. "Oh, uncle, I'm glad to see ye." He grinned now, relieved and much easier to convince than Mairi that I was here on honourable terms. But then, he hadn't heard the whole story. Come to think of it, neither had Mairi. "Wait till I tell Ma!" William fairly danced with excitement. "How long will you be here? Can we have a ceilidh, auntie? I'm learning the pipes." I winced and decided this had gone far enough. I hated to share my only day with Mairi with an excitable 9-year-old, but if I let him go home, he would spread the news all over the area, and we'd be visited by every branch of the family for miles around, and it pained me to think most would believe I had deserted, even if only for the day. "Come, William, you can help me mend the hole in the barn." Mairi pointed to the food rapidly going to waste on her table.
"What about your breakfast? You can't start work on an empty stomach."
"'Twill keep for lunch." I couldn't bring myself to tell Mairi I was a ghost, and I certainly did not wish to involve William in this. Mairi fisted her hands on her hips and gave me a stubborn look.
"Adam Gordon, I didn't fix this for you to let it go to ruin. You're a large man and need the food."
She turned to William, who was looking hopefully at the platter.
"Sit down, lad, and I'll get you a few bannocks. I know your ma didn't let you leave this morning without your breakfast."
William accepted in a trice, nipping up to the table and scooting his chair in place before I had a chance to protest. I eyed the dog. What were the chances I could pass the food to Paul? With Mairi watching, slim to none. I pulled my chair out and sat. I toyed with the knife for a moment, then picked up a bannock and twirled it in my fingers.
"What's wrong with my cooking, Adam Gordon? You ate it just fine last night."
Paul whined, and Mairi whipped her head around, bringing her gaze back to me with narrowing eyes.
"You fed it to Paul, aye? 'Tis why she's begging for more."
She folded her arms across her belly, a pained look on her face.
"Do you not like my cooking any more?"
Chapter 8. The look of betrayal in her eyes finished me. I'm only a man, and where Mairi is concerned, I have no will of my own. From the day I met her, I vowed she'd never know a day of sorrow because of me. Now, because of this war, She would have much sorrow, even though I would give her a chance to raise our bairn. I'd no wish to cut short her happiness at seeing me, but it looked as though my plan was headed downhill very rapidly, and there was little I could do to stop it, except try the truth. I glanced down at my plate. I canna eat.
What do you mean you canna eat? Are you ill?
Her puzzled look made it clear she didn't understand. I canna eat food.
It isn't allowed?
She shook her head.
Speak plainly, Adam. Why can you nae eat?
William's head swivelled from me to Mairi and back again, like a wee owl. Apparently 'twas my turn to speak. My mouth was as dry as owl shoe leather. I'm a ghost. Her face scrunched with doubt. William's eyes widened. A ghost? Apparently you could convince a child of anything with scarcely trying. Aye, a ghost. I moved my focus to Mairi. Here, come sit with me. I didn't wish her to faint and fall, but she took a step backward, away from me.
Nay, I believe I can listen to what you have to say from here.
I sighed, not liking the sudden paleness of her cheeks. You will not like this. Mairi blinked.
Nay, I dinna think I will.
Her voice was small, and her distance from me loomed in more than mere steps. The peat sputtered on the hearth, loud in the tension-filled silence, as I sought the right words to say. In the next day or so, Prince Charlie will launch a plan to catch the English unawares, but everything will go wrong, and many lives will be lost. Her eyes were huge, her face pale, and her breathing whistled shallow and fast as she struggled with the consequence of my words.
Nay.
Mairi, I died on the battlefield that day, but I've been given one last day with ye.
'Tis nae possible.
She crossed herself. She wobbled, and I leapt to my feet and caught her, but she pushed me away.
I cannae believe you.
Would I make this up? I thought it was a good question. Blood rushed to her cheeks. She knew me, an honest man.
I think you need a good rest. I may have a healer. William, would you?
I broke in, somewhat testily. I'm nae touched in the head, nor ill. Both William and Mairi stared at me in disbelief. I stared back at them. I'm dead. Mairi gave me a sweet smile.
Dinna fash, Adam. I'll look after you.
I protested, fast that I couldn't make her see the truth. You dinna understand. You canna care for me. I was given this day to help ye, but as I told ye afore, I must leave by nightfall. My time will be up. Are ye a restless ghost, uncle? William asked, full of morbid curiosity.
William, dinna encourage him.
The lad's partly right, Mairi. There are many of us who never left the battlefield, never found our rest because of things in our past, things we wished we'd done. But, auntie, he doesn't look like a ghost. William gave me the sceptical look only a lad can affect. Prove it. I tossed his glare back at him, but he didn't back down. This was the entire point, aye. To convince them I wasn't the best guest to have at a party, and then to convince Mairi to take the bairn and flee to America. A widow and the bairn of a known Jacobite would be an easy target for the Duke of Cumberland's men, and I wouldn't save her life now, only for her to lose it a few weeks later at the hands of angry soldiers who hated the fact her husband had fought and died for bonny Prince Charlie. I returned to my seat at the table and picked up an oatcake. I inhaled its rich, familiar scent and the tiny bit of cinnamon Mairi used when she could get it. My mouth watered. I wanted that oatcake, knew how it would fill my mouth and senses as I chewed. It was one of my most distinct memories of home, and now I was a ghost, and the eating of it was lost to me. I took a bite. Chewing it brought me no pleasure. There was no rush of saliva to my mouth to mingle with the once familiar flavours of the wee cake, and I couldn't swallow it. After a few moments more, I turned away and spat the whole of it into my hand. William nodded. Wee Annie does that with her vegetables. I had to agree with him. He had no way of knowing I didn't choose not to eat the bannock, but that my body simply didn't work that way anymore. As a ghost, I had no need for sustenance. I harumphed. I canna eat, William. You know how good a cook your auntie is. Would ye turn one of her bannocks down? Not unless I was dead. Realising what he'd said, he clapped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. Exactly. But not eating Mairi's good cooking wasn't the proof they needed. I'd have to think of something else. If you're a ghost, William began, a slight edge to his voice, how did you die?
William!
Mairi gasped, her hand at her throat. I grabbed the wee loon by his shoulder and marched him out the door. We're going to fix the hole in the barn, Mairi. We'll be back in a wee bit. I grabbed my coat from the peg by the door and clapped a hat atop William's head. William twisted in my grip, but I turned him firmly toward the barn. There's a spot the sheep can get out. Fetch some wood from the stack a bit shorter than ye, and meet me next to the barn. Shrugging off my hand, William slouched to the stack of wood next to the blocks of peat he was required to keep for Mairi, kicking at the snowdrifts as he went. I watched as he sorted through the pile, then stepped inside the barn to gather a few tools. We met at the corner of the barn a few minutes later. A sulky look in his eyes, he handed me a length of wood, about as big around as my forearm. I took it from him with a nod of approval and set it upright on the remains of an old stump. With one clean blow of the axe, I split the wood down the middle and placed it against the side of the barn. Nice fit. William nodded, his sulky look disappearing. Knees in the muddy mix of melting snow and earth, he braced the wood whilst I nailed it in place. He was a good lad, and I had been relieved when my brother suggested William help Mairi out a bit each day with some of the chores whilst I was gone. I didn't know why I never thought to have him patch the barn, except I'd had every intention of returning home and doing it myself. Mairi stared at them from the doorway of the cottage, her finger pleating her heavy wool skirt over and over again as she pondered Adam's sudden appearance. She'd longed for his return every day and night since he'd left, since he'd first mentioned joining Glenbucket's brigade if truth be known, and though he'd never intentionally walk away from his obligation to the war and Prince Charles, his obligation to her ran just as deep. The warmth of pure longing spread outward from her heart. Even from the first time she'd met him, she'd never wanted to be parted from him. They shared everything, from the delight in the new lambs to the special appreciation they found in each other, and these weeks apart had been especially difficult with the burn on the way.
You were so thrilled when I told you about the Baron, Adam.
Mairi's lips softened into a smile of remembrance.
And you've been ever so attentive to me these months. You're such a good husband, more than I could ever have hoped for.
But it troubled her to think he considered himself dead. A coldness struck the centre of her being, and she crossed herself to ward off the growing fear.
I will nae think on this. 'Tis too outrageous, too unbelievable. You've seen too much of battle, would be my guess. Your gentle soul had no idea what to expect. I will not even consider it a premonition. I couldn't survive without you, Adam, and I believe you will walk back down that lane to me again soon.
She drank in one last glimpse of Adam instructing William as he repaired the hole in the barn wall. His red gold hair gleamed in the sunlight, and his shoulders stretched the fabric of his well-worn coat.
I'll make him a new one. I can save a few pence and purchase what I need later this summer.
She laid a hand across her swollen belly as the burn kicked and gently stroked the mound.
I'll be glad when you decide to come into this world, wee one. 'Tis tiresome, toting you around like this.
She glanced down.
Then my ankles are swollen like sausages.
Turning from the door, she cleared the food and dishes from the table, rubbing her back absently at the dull, persistent ache. A frown returned to furrow her brow.
I cannae believe him. I willnae believe him.
She stared at the table where she would soon lay out a frugal noon meal for the three of them. Slowly, she set a wooden plate in front of one chair, then another. Her hand hesitated over a third plate, but she drew it back with a sense of dread. 2. She would only set places for 2. Chapter 9. Uncle, are ye truly a ghost? Ye dinna look like one. William's question jerked me from my thoughts. Aye, but 'tis not something you can tell anyone. His look was solemn, yet I could tell he struggled with the restraint. If 'tis difficult for me to tell ye I'm a ghost, or to prove it to ye, do ye truly think anyone else will believe ye? I widened my eyes dramatically. Or do ye think they'll put you to bed and dose ye with all manner of nasty herbs and concoctions? He made a gagging face, then grinned. I dinna think they'd believe me. I nodded. Good lad. But ye are a ghost. I sighed. Aye, I'm a ghost. I died on the battlefield, and I've been restless ever since. But a wee witch gave me a chance to come back and fix things for your auntie before I finally earned my rest. I ruffled his tousled hair. I didn't have to convince ye I'm a ghost. Just remind ye that ye cannae tell anyone ye saw me here today. His eyes narrowed. Are ye sure you're not a deserter? It was then I realised the problem wasn't that he didn't believe in ghosts, but he didn't know how to think of me as dead a few days from now. At this time in his life, I was still alive. In my time, I was dead 270 years. Now, somehow back a couple of days before the Battle of Culloden. I glanced around the yard and finally spied Paul, snuggled beneath the low branch overhanging of a nearby tree. Muzzle on her forepaws, she eyed me warily. She was the only one who sensed something was wrong. Do you see Paul over there? William followed the sweep of my arm as I pointed to the black and white form lying motionless in the shadow of the tree. He nodded. She was my friend, aye. You always found us together. William turned his puzzled look on me. Does she not like you any more? I remembered her soft growl earlier. As far as I can tell, she senses I'll be gone tonight, and she's grieving. Something isn't right to her. Mayhap she realises I'm a ghost, mayhap she doesn't, but something is changing and she knows it. William held up another piece of wood, and I swung the hammer. The nail bent. Damn, I didn't have time to keep trying to get things right. I dug my skein do from my belt and used the tip to pry the nail from the wood. The blade winked at me an instant before it slid sideways across the back of my hand. William gasped, then he cried out and pointed. La! I already knew what he saw, or more correctly, what he didn't say. The skin dew had ploughed a furrow through my skin, but there was nary a drop of blood. The red, life-sustaining liquid flowed warmly through my veins, but none spilled from the wound. "Ye are a ghost!" Fear showed in his wide eyes. "I bled my last on the battlefield, lad. I willna bleed again." He was silent as I finished hammering the wooden spikes over the hole. There was no time to pull out the bad wood and plain new planks to fit the space. William and I did the best we could. It wasn't overly pretty, but the sheep were now secure, and I breathed a sigh of relief. No sudden escape of the precious ewes would draw Mairi from the house at night and cause her to slip on the ice. My job was finished. "How did you die?" William asked. "I died when a piece of an exploded mortar hit an artery in my neck." "Did it hurt?" He tilted his head, staring at my neck to find the wound, his curiosity sincere, not morbid. "Did it? I'm certain that it did." I touched my neck in reflection, but the gaping wound was gone, thanks to Sonny. The memory of it had faded, though. Mostly, I remembered the regret, as I knew my life was over. Would William understand? Aye, but then I didn't think on it. I focused on Mairi and the burn, and the fact I wouldn't see him grow up. I gave William a ghost of a smile. 'Twas over very quickly, didn't he, Fash? He flashed me a mixed look of guilt and horror, so I ruffled his hair again. He ducked his head and grinned. I stood. "Come, lad, let's see what else we can do for Mairi." Chapter 10. We spent a couple of hours drawing water and repairing the gate to the little garden. Once the ground warmed, if she stayed here near Strathbogie, she would need a way to keep rabbits and the like from nibbling her plants. For all my wishing she and the barn would leave Scotland and avoid the Duke of Cumberland's ire, the fact was it would be some time before they could travel, and they would need food. We waded through the sheep, checking for foot rot and winter sores, but the fleeces were clean, and we didn't find a lame one in the bunch, thanks to William, who kept their pen clean and well stocked with dry straw. Paul nipped in and out, keeping the sheep neatly separated as we worked our way through. No matter what she now felt toward me, Paul was a dedicated herder. The ewes, due to start lambing any day, milled about, bleating their agitation as we sorted through the flock. One particularly grumpy old ewe butted William hard with her bony head, and he slipped in the loose straw. I saw him go down, heard his shout of alarm. The noise and sudden movement startled the already anxious sheep, and they jammed together for safety, right on top of William. I waded through the sea of woolly bodies as Paul darted past me. She faced off with the owl besom, holding her away from William. Catching sight of William's shirt, I plunged my arms downward and caught him by his collar. Dragging him up, I set him on his feet. His clothing was rumpled and stained with the muck of the stable floor, and his hat hung askew over his forehead, but his eyes glinted fiercely from beneath the brim with displeasure. His jaw clenched. "Odd biddies!" He dusted himself off and shoved his hat back in place. I laughed. "You can say damn this once, William. I will not tell your auntie." "When will I be told like ye and my da? The old besom wouldn't ha' taken ye down." I eyed him thoughtfully. "You grew fast as a wee lad, so I'd say 'tis time for ye to take off and grow again. I predict you'll be a strapping lad in a few years' time." William squared his shoulders as though his growth spurt was imminent. I motioned to the sheep. "We'll let the lot out for a bit of sunshine this afternoon, and put them away before dark." The sheep bounded through the open doorway, not needing Paul's encouragement, and settled into fighting what bits of vegetation the melting snow uncovered. The sun warmed as the day progressed and beat down on the back of my neck as William and I did a few more odd jobs. Just after the sun crested above us, Mairi called to us from the doorway. The lad and I stomped into the house, careful to remove our boots at the door. A noon meal was laid out on the table, fresh bread and some cheese next to the bacon I hadn't eaten earlier, and only 2 platters. I eyed Mairi. Her face averted, she sat in one of the chairs and motioned for William to take the other. She didn't want to believe, but she didn't wish to discuss it again either. I understood. To consider me a ghost meant she had to believe I was dead, and she wasn't ready for that. I wished with all my heart it wasn't true, but it was, and Sonny had been quite clear a day or 2 was all I had with her. I watched her eat small, delicate bites that seemed to have difficulty going down, betraying her thoughts as much as if she'd spoken them aloud. William wolfed his food down with all the grace of a young, ravenous beast. I smiled, thinking for a moment that this could be the scene 9 years from now, as our son and Mairi shared a meal. Our daughter, though she'd likely have her ma's charm and grace. Mairi finished quickly and rose, collecting the platters. She cast an anguished glance at me, and I saw the indecision tug in the glistening depths of her eyes. I clapped my hands on my thighs and stood. "William, you've done well today. 'Tis time for ye to head home. I'll walk with ye part of the way." I gave Mairi a firm look. "I'll be back in a bit." She nodded, then wrapped her arms about my waist and hugged me tight. Before I could react, she moved away, her back rigid as she began washing the dishes. I opened my mouth to speak, but decided what I wanted to say could best wait until William was gone. I guided the lad outside, and we shoved our feet into our boots. We first herded the small flock back to the barn with Paul's help, then secured the door. I motioned the dog back into the house. "Stay with Mairi, Paul. Stay with Mairi." She ducked her slender head and slipped back toward the house, as silent as a black and white shadow. William and I headed down the trail to his home, the air cooling noticeably as the sun slid into early afternoon. Silence settled on the small glen as Adam shut the door behind the bleating news. Mairi waited until Adam and William were both lost to sight before she left her vigil at the door. Her hand dropped to Paul's head, giving the silky ears a brief rub. Her heart beat rapidly in her chest, firing her blood with anticipation and fear.
If Adam comes back before nightfall, will he stay? If he doesn't, does it mean he spoke the truth? That he is a ghost?
Rattled, she closed the door and set about making the stew from the leftover food. Not that there was much left with William at the table, but the lad had done a fine day's work and needed feeding. She kept busy, ignoring the dull ache in her back, refusing to glance outside and watch the path for Adam's return. Sunlight traced the hours across the wood floor, and she faltered as the golden light faded. A sharp pain radiated through her back, and she rubbed it away impatiently with the heel of her hand. Bending over the hearth, she pulled the pot toward her on its hook, giving the contents a stir. She tasted the stew and, approving the flavour, lifted the pot to set it aside to begin cooling. Another pain stabbed her belly, doubling her over. The pot slipped from her grasp as she braced herself against the hearth to keep from falling. Broth spread across the floor, Bits of meat and vegetables tumbled from the lip of the pot.
"'Tis much too early."
Another pain struck.
"Did I miscount?"
She struggled to stand.
"Nay, the bairn is early."
Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, plunging the house into semi-darkness, doubling her fears.
"Oh, Adam, I need you so much."
She sucked in a breath on a desolate cry, unable to deny the truth any longer. Adam was gone, and could not help her now. Fighting against another pain, she clenched her teeth and turned her attention to the burn as she hobbled slowly to the bedroom. Without the strength to unlace her dress, she collapsed onto the bed. We approached William's house. "I want you to remember not to tell anyone you saw me today." He nodded solemnly. "You seem too solid for a ghost, but I know you wouldn't have missed Auntie Mary's cooking if you could help it." He gave me a thorough look from the corner of his eyes. "You should be thin and pale. I should be able to reach through ye. 'Tis a special magic which makes me like this. I cannae explain it." "Are you cold?" he asked. I shrugged. "I know 'tis winter, and I feel the cold air, but it doesn't make me cold." I had experienced a different cold for nearly 300 years. A chilly spring afternoon didn't faze me much. We reached the edge of the woods, and I halted. A thin trail of smoke rose through the bare limbs of the trees. William's ma would be readying the evening meal soon. I breathed deep, but could only smell peat smoke on the air. "I'll leave you here, William. I thank ye for helping Mairi. I'll rest easy knowing she's being cared for so well." William flung himself at me, burying his head against my stomach, his wiry arms wrapped about me. "I didn't want you to go, uncle. I didn't want you to be a ghost." My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't answer. What was there to say? Platitudes fell short of the real grief he was experiencing. At 9 years old, he would have to accept his Uncle Adam wasn't he coming home again. War is hell, even for those who didn't fight it. I finally pried him away and stooped to look him in the eye. "You're a man now, William. You willna forget me, but you will remember you did me a great service by helping Mairi." He nodded, his eyes swimming. He gulped. "Have you seen my da?" I shook my head. "Nay, we weren't in the same regiment, and I didn't know what happened to him. He isna one of the restless ghosts." I didn't mention there were only 79 of us out of over 1,000, either killed in battle that day or wounded and given no mercy, simply slaughtered where they lay. William seemed to accept my words for what they were. Neither a promise his dad would come home one day, nor an attempt to hide the truth. I simply didn't know, and would give him no reason to mourn prematurely. "Now off with you, lad. Kiss your ma, be nice to your sister, and see to it you didn't speak of me to anyone." He nodded and hurried down the path without a backward glance. I turned toward home, following the trail that wound by the river. The sun reflected off the waters, swollen with the melting snow. Here and there, muddy spots peeked through the crusty snow, great dark blotches against the pristine white. Tiny flowers poked their heads through the moist ground, littering the area with the promise of spring. The sun was warm on my shoulders, but the air was crisp and cold in my lungs. Much of what had begun melting today would refreeze tonight. I stared into the river a moment more, recalling my childhood. Trees arched over our favourite swimming hole just around that bend. Trout were plentiful, and I'd crafted many a trap made of sticks and bits of yarn I'd snitched from my ma's knitting basket. Shrieks of delight as we leapt into the water cold even in the summer, seemed as real as my memory. But it wasn't a shriek of delight that filled my ears. 'Twas a cry for help. Chapter 11. My feet raced across the thorn ground, slipping and sliding in the mud and slush. Small stones, hidden by the snow, twisted beneath my boots, and I stumbled, catching myself against larger rocks as I hurried to the water's edge. Slapping my hands against a snow-crusted boulder, I came to a stop. I scanned the area, but saw no one. Taking a slow breath, I listened for the cry again, but only the roar of the peat-foamed water rose to my ears. Was I wrong? I looked up and down the river again, watching the rushing water for signs of anything human. The cry came again, weaker. My head swivelled toward the sound. I saw the wave of a hand as it grabbed at a rock at the far side of the river. The crossing was nearby. Had he or she been swept downstream from there? The hows and whys didn't matter. Whoever it was had only minutes in the cold water before they would succumb to the frigid temperature. My time with Mairi was rapidly drawn to an end, but I couldn't leave this person to the mercy of the river. I stripped off my coat and laid it across the boulder, setting my boots quickly beside it. I ran a short distance upstream, then waded into the water and struck off for the far shore. The current pulled me quickly back downstream. The cold water soaked into my clothes, sucking me low, hindering my movements. Though it had been many years since I'd swum, the memory was there, and my arms stroked strongly across the river. Water surged over partially hidden rocks and rolled back in my face. I sucked a goodly amount up my nose and down my throat. I kept swimming. Being a ghost already, I didn't suppose I could be killed again. But the cold water did something to my morale. The bitterness of it seeped inside me, chiding me for going head first into such danger. I could no longer hear the cries for help, and had lost sight of where I was headed. Had I been swept past the lad? I'd certainly be swept ashore somewhere downstream, little worse for wear, but the poor lad or lass wouldn't be so lucky to make it alive. A partially submerged tree branch as big around as my thigh bobbed in and out of the water. I grasped it, trying to push myself around it, and my hand met cold flesh. Small fingers gripped the wet bark. I braced against a limb and worked my way along the slender arm. I found the heavy wool collar of a coat and hauled it upward. The child's head cleared the water, but hung limply on his neck. A heavy braid clung to her shoulder, and my mind noted the burn was a lass. I heaved upward again, trying to shift the water out of her wee lungs. She sputtered and moaned. Her eyes opened a crack, but all I saw were the whites. "Cough it up, lassie, cough it up." She retched and twitched in my hands, but her skin was grey, and I knew she had only a few minutes left. The sun began its descent behind the mountains, and the already frosty air became colder. I tugged on the lass's collar. Her eyes flew open, and her shriek raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I wiped a splash of water from my face. "What's wrong, lass?" she whimpered.
My leg? 'Tis stuck.
My heart sank. Somewhere beneath this rushing water, her leg, or more likely her boot, was trapped by this bobbing branch. Her lips were blue, and her hand didn't respond when I gripped the tiny fingers. She looked to be 5 or 6 years old, but her eyes were tired, the skin wrinkled around them. Somewhere her ma waited anxiously for her, and even if her da was searching, I didn't think he would arrive in time. I forced my way through the water closer to her, and hugged her close, careful not to pull on her leg again. She burrowed her face in the side of my neck, away from the slap of the water. I was cold. She was colder. If I let her go and tried to free her leg, she'd slip beneath the water. If I continued to hold her head up, hoping for help that might not come, she'd quickly die of the cold. Sometimes problems have no good solutions. She trembled violently against me, and I swore beneath my breath. Not that she would have heard me, but I wouldn't say such things in her presence. Why could I not be super strong? The children at the visitor centre seemed to believe such things existed. I'd seen their shirts, their backpacks and blankets emblazoned with fanciful characters with bulging arms and strange clothing. Over the years we'd learned these were superheroes, with names like Superman, Batman and Iron Man. There was even a Flash Gordon, and I'd gotten teased quite a bit for a few days after we discovered that one. But I was a ghost, not a superhero, and the best I could do was not freeze to death with her. The limb shifted in the swift river, and my toes scrambled for purchase against the rocks on the bottom. A large one shifted beneath my feet, and the limb crabbed sideways. The lass jerked. "Stay with me, lass." I shook her gently. "What's your name?" She didn't move, and her body sagged a bit in my arms. The first rays of the lowering sun slid behind the mountain, evening drawn near. 'Twas becoming difficult to see the far shore, though the mounds of snow cut the sunset in brilliant hues of orange and gold. The lass and I were running out of time. I shifted my weight, trying to move the rock again. The burn slipped in my arms, and I jostled her head out of the water as much as I could. It napped at her chin. "What's your name, lass?" Her eyelids flickered, and she stared dully at me.
Bridget. I'm Bridget.
"Bridget, you need to keep looking at my face." Her blank stare wavered, threatened to close.
Why?
Her voice was faint, a mere wisp of a sound. "'Tis a well-known fact I cannae tread water if ye dinna look at me." Her eyelids fluttered. I pushed harder with my foot and felt the rock wiggle. "Do ye know what happens once I move this rock?" A wave slapped me in the face, and I slewed my head to one side, spitting water to clear my mouth. Her eyes followed my movement. "I know of a lass who's going home to her ma and a roaring fire."
I'm too cold.
Her eyelids drooped again. "But it's better than that," I insisted as I edged forward and felt the rock with my knee. I squatted just a bit, thankful my height allowed me to reach the bottom of the river at this point. My lower leg lined up with the rock, and I leaned forward, putting what pressure I could on the rock. It didn't budge. My attention came back to the lass. Her head drifted listlessly to one side. I shook her. "Bridget, there will be warm blankets and hot bannocks." I used my toes to dig in the pebbles beneath the rock. "What's your favourite food?" She didn't answer, and I shouted in her ear. "Food, Bridget! What's your favourite food?" I slipped and went under. I thrust her away from me to keep her head above water. I came up sputtering, but the movement of the pebbles caused the rock to shift. Bridget felt lighter in my arms, and I pulled her upward. There was no resistance. With a whoop of accomplishment, I tucked her beneath one arm and stroked hard for the shore. The current was strong, and we drifted farther downstream. I dragged her ashore some distance away and staggered to my feet. I laid her on the bank and stared at her motionless body. "Why, Sonny? Why did you bring me here and not give me the ability to be a hero?" I glanced about for my coat and boots and spied them several yards away. I raced to the rock and snatched them up, scrambling as I made the turn to dash back to Bridget's side. I stripped her sodden cloak from her and shoved her boneless arms into my coat, wrapping it about her, pulling her into my arms. I sheltered her with my body, crooning to her as I rocked her back and forth. "Where do you live, Bridget?" I peered into the deepening gloom. I could take her home with me to Mairi, but she needed help now. Gently exposing one limb, I rubbed her skin briskly. A tiny flush appeared, and I moved quickly to her other arm. "Come, Bridget, you never told me what your favourite food is. Look at me, so I can see your pretty eyes. Are they blue, Bridget, or mayhap brown?" I couldn't stop chattering. Sonny had promised me a chance to be a hero, and I wasn't going to muck it up. I'd already accomplished what I'd set out to do, and though it hurt mightily to think my day was ending, and I wouldn't see Mairi again, I couldn't imagine leaving Bridget's family without their lass, just so I could spend a few more moments with my sweet wife. The long shadows of late afternoon stretched into evening. The sun's rays were losing their strength, and the mounds of snow faded to pink. Soon they would be blue, then grey, and my time here would be over. Bridget's eyes fluttered, and I laughed for joy. I searched the pockets of my coat and found my tinderbox. Praises. I hadn't needed it these many years, and couldn't have said if it was still in my pocket or not. Inside was some dry tinder and a small square of charcloth. I'd meant to make more at the morning fire that day of the battle, but we'd been mustered early, and this was all I had left. There would be no margin for error. "Bridget, I'm going to look for wood for a fire. You must stay here and keep bundled up, aye." Her skin was still grey, but her eyes followed me. She neither nodded nor spoke, but I couldn't waste time. I hurried to a fallen limb, some of its branches held high in the air, bare of snow or damp. Carefully brushing away the crust of snow from the cluster of long dead leaves, I found small, dry twigs deep inside. Encouraged, I grabbed a handful. A deadfall nearby produced some slightly larger pieces of dry wood beneath a layer of snow and branches, and I snatched them up, eager to get the fire started. Placing the precious dry wood in my boots to keep it from the wet ground, I scraped away a circle of snow and scattered some pebbles within it. I quickly built a small pyre of tinder, placing the charcloth on top. Hands shaking, I struck the fire steel down across the surface of the flint. Sparks flew upward. I nestled the flint more firmly against the cloth. This time a few sparks landed in the charcloth, and it glowed with the promise of fire. I blew carefully on the embers, and after a long, agonizing moment, they burst into flame. I caught the flicker of pleasure in Bridget's eyes, and a surge of hope welled in me, a boon for having lost my last hour with Mairi. Tending the little fire, I soon had an adequate flame, and I pulled Bridget into my lap. Unwrapping my coat from her small body, I opened it to the fire, and was rewarded with her small sigh of contentment. I drew my first solid breath since hearing her cry, and settled in to devote my last few minutes in this world to giving this wee lass a second chance at life. Chapter 12.
I knew you wouldn't give up.
I jerked my head at the sound of Sonny's voice. She was seated on a rock just beyond the glow of the fire, the familiar greenish aura faint about her, her black cloak blending into the shadows. My heart sank. "Not now, Sonny, I cannae leave a lass like this." I gestured to Bridget as she shook in my arms. "Once she's warm, though, I'll find where she lives and see she gets there. It cannae take much longer."
Bridget isn't your challenge, Adam.
"You mean I failed?" Though I hadn't given thought to winning the boon of a few rounds with our bonny Prince Charlie, all I'd really wanted was a chance to repair the barn and save Mairi from chasing down stray sheep and falling on the ice. To have gotten so sidetracked as to have lost the challenge sent a shock through my system.
I thought you didn't want a challenge. You said you only wished to protect your wife.
I do. I did. I gave her a hard look. Are ye nae here to take me back? Sonny glanced about her.
Your day is nigh past, Adam. And you did fix the hole in the barn.
She turned her piercing eyes back on me.
But there is yet unfinished business at your cottage.
A shout rose on the air. Torchlight wobbled some distance upriver. Sonny rose.
Bridget's da is coming. Dinna linger, Adam. Go and make peace with your pretty wife. I can give you a few more hours, 'tis all. You're close, Adam. So close.
And with those words, she vanished. I'd no time to puzzle over the meaning. A burly man, bundled against the cold, came within the circle of light of my small fire. "Bridget!" The lass weakly lifted her arms to him, and he grabbed her from my lap. She was immediately lost within the folds of his plaid, and he held her tight. After a few moments, he lifted anguished eyes to mine. With a benign smile, I rose to my feet, shrugging into my damp coat. "Thank ye," the man said. "Her brothers said she fell into the river near the crossing at Strathbogie. By the time they searched for her, then came to me. I didn't hope to find her alive." I heard her cry for help. She was trapped by a limb. It took a bit of doing to get her free, but I believe she'll be fine now with a bit of food and something warm to drink. Bridget's da reached inside his sporran and pulled out a flask, offering me a nip. I waved him off. "The two of ye need it more." Nodding, he tilted the flask to his own lips, then gently tipped a wee bit into Bridget. She grimaced, then grinned, her cheeks flushed bright pink. I imagined the familiar warmth of the whisky as it spread through my body. Bridget tilted her head at me from the protection of her da's chest. "How can I thank ye?" the man asked. My throat tightened. Some day soon, my family would be at the mercy of strangers. Remember the widows and children. Be kind to the innocent. He stared at me for some moments, then gave a single nod. He shoved the flask back into his sporran. "Peace be with ye." His precious daughter in his arms, he turned back the way he'd come. Bridget peered at me over her da's shoulder.
Raspberries. My favourite food is raspberries.
Chapter 13. I shook the remaining pieces of tinder from my boots and shoved my feet into them. I carefully stomped out the fire, then hurried toward home. I couldn't wait to see my sweet Mairi again, though the parting this time would be hard. Sonny had promised me a few more hours to say my piece, see my fill of Mairi and my burn. He, or she, wasn't due to arrive for another few weeks, but mayhap the burn would kick again, reassuring me how strong he was. I trudged on through the snow and muck as the shadows lengthened and the last of the sun faded behind the hills. A dog's bark echoed through the trees. I quickened my step, on the lookout for anything out of sorts. Paul barked again, not her sharp, something may be out there bark, warning the interloper she was alert and protecting the family, but a rapid, distressed bark, the one she used when the sheep were out. Muttering under my breath, I broke into a run and cleared the trees surrounding the glen a few moments later. Paul bounded across the yard toward me, then darted away. Glancing over her shoulder to make sure I followed, she ran to the house. The door was partly ajar, but only a faint glow from the hearth lit the opening. The blood that had strained so hotly through my veins only moments before ran cold. I took the 3 steps in one leap and burst through the door. A pot lay on the floor next to the hearth, soup congealing on the floor. Mairi was a dark shape huddled on the bed in the next room. I flew to her side and knelt on the floor next to her. "Mairi, Mohia, what ails ye? Is it the burn?" Her soft kitten-like mew of distress tore at me, and I ran my palm across her forehead. Her skin was moist and clammy. "Tell me what to do, Mairi. I'm here to help ye." Her eyes opened, and she stared at me.
Adam, I thought you were gone. I thought you weren't coming back.
"Oh, Mairi, I had to stop at the river. A wee lass had fallen in." She smiled and touched my cheek in a gentle caress.
You're so caring, Adam. Such a good man.
Her voice was soft, distant, and it frightened me. "What's happening, Mairi?"
My pains have started. They took me by surprise. Not long after you left with William.
"The burn isn't due for weeks. Are you sure?" The words sounded daft even to my ears, but I couldn't grasp the fact that after all my work, after being granted a short time with Mairi, she could still go into labour early and lose the burn.
They came hard and fast at first, though they've settled a bit.
She bit her lip and gripped the blanket beneath her. As little as I knew about birth and burns, I could tell these were no early pains I'd heard women speak of. The only thing I knew to do was to make Mairi as comfortable as possible and backtrack to William's house and bring his ma to help. I didn't like leaving Mairi alone, but I saw no alternative. I tucked a pillow behind her back and dashed into the kitchen. I tossed blocks of peat on the hearth and prodded the fire back to life. I added water to the kettle on the hook over the fire. Grabbing a cloth from the stack next to the sink, I filled a bowl with fresh water and hurried back to the bedroom. Mairi moaned quietly, and I could tell by her gritted teeth she tried to keep the extent of her pain from me. When it passed, she panted softly. I noticed the straining laces of her gown, and it seemed only practical to at least loosen them for her comfort. As soon as she eased, I untied the strings. She struggled to sit, and between us we removed her gown, leaving her thin shift, which was soon damp with sweat. I covered her with a light blanket to ward off a chill. I didn't know what to do, Mairi. I felt helpless and alone. Worse than the despair of the moor and the missive the lad had brought me at the campfire the night before the battle, the thought of losing Mairi and the burn numbed me. Nothing had changed. I was still helpless. I sat beside Mairi on the bed, her head tucked against my side, one hand draped across my thigh. "You need a woman's help, but I didn't wish to leave you like this." Her fingers curled claw-like against my leg.
Dinna go. Please stay with me.
I kissed the damp curls matted on her forehead, tasting the salty tang of her efforts. "We'll work this together then, ye and I." She nodded and sighed. After a moment, I realized she had drifted into a light sleep. To say I was terrified would be an understatement. Men were kept largely ignorant of the birthing process, and I was no better than most. My knowledge consisted of the nervous dab pacing the floor as his wife laboured to bring the burn into the world from the opposite side of a firmly closed door. I'd sat with a couple of my friends in this situation, watching as women bustled in and out of the room, carrying bowls of water. At least I'd thought of that already, and making general shushing sounds to anyone who tried to question them. I didn't wish to face what was to come by myself, but Mairi needed me, and I wouldn't let her down. I would do anything in my power to save her. The room felt overwarm, and I slipped from the bed, careful not to wake her. I checked on the fire in the hearth and damped it down a bit. It wouldn't do to bring a new burn into a cold house, but his ma would likely labour better if the air wasn't so close. My chest was tight, and I needed a draught of cold air. I gently opened the door and stepped onto the stoop. Paul's nails clicked on the wood floor as she followed me. Had not given her a thought since I'd come inside more than an hour ago, or had it been longer? I stretched, noting a tightness in my back. The night was clear, and stars winked overhead. I knew there would be another flurry of snow before winter was completely over. A flurry that would sap the strength and morale of men and cause ill-made plans to go awry. Why did you send me back here tonight, Sonny? Did you know Mairi was in labour? Why did you not tell me so I could get help? I was as close to William's house as here. She needs a woman's help, not my fumbling hands and ignorance. Damn it, Sonny, why? I stared into the night, the bitter air stretching the skin over my bones. The wind soughed in the trees, rattling the last of the dead leaves, lingering on their branches like the clatter of old bones. I scratched Paul's head. She whined. A green glow moved toward the house from the edge of the yard. I knew 'twas Sonny, and I tasted the bitterness of utter failure in the back of my mouth. She continued to advance, and a moment later I could see her form, striding with girlish grace through the snow, the hood of her cloak thrown back, her arms swinging at her sides. She met me on the steps with a gentle smile.
Your Mairi is doing well.
How should I know? I'm nae midwife. My words were sharp, and they tempered the smile on Sonny's face. What did you think I could do by coming back? I watch helpless as my wife labours, and I didn't know what to do. All the agony I'd felt when I first read the missive about sweet Mary's death settled over me again with punishing weight. The urge to clout something twisted my muscles. With a groan of frustration, I slammed my fist into the doorframe, feeling the force of it shudder through my arm and shoulder. My frustration still boiled. Sonny waited patiently until I regained my composure, hands folded placidly in front of her.
You aren't holding up so well, Adam.
I raked a hand through my hair. Nay, I'm not.
Might we go inside? I'm no midwife either, but mayhap another woman's presence would be comforting.
How was I to explain a strange woman to Mairi? Earlier, Sonny had told me Mairi couldn't see her. She would change that, and my wife would surely know Sonny wasn't the midwife or any local woman. Would Sonny convince Mairi at last that I was a ghost? Mayhap her soothing presence would help Mairi accept the fact that I would soon be gone. I nodded and stepped aside, allowing Sonny to enter the house. She slipped her cloak off, and I draped it over the back of a chair near the hearth. I didn't know why I thought she might like it warmed before she set out again, but I would have done so for any guest. Sonny glided into the bedroom. Mairi still slept, but was restless, and the blanket had slipped away. Sonny grasped the edge of the covering and gently pulled it to Mairi's shoulders. Mairi's eyes flickered open, and I tensed. Sonny pressed a palm to Mairi's shoulder.
I'm here to help you.
Mairi stared at her for a moment, then nodded her acceptance. Chapter 14. And just like that, my presence appeared to be unneeded, unwanted, without purpose, and yet I couldn't leave the room. Sonny beckoned to me, and I jumped at the chance to be useful. Together we shifted Mairi to her feet and stripped the bed. She sent me for fresh straw, and I barreled my way to the barn for a large, fragrant armful. Piling it on the mattress, Sonny then had me cover it with a clean sheet and several layers of linens before allowing Mairi to sink back onto the bed. I bundled the soiled sheets and set them aside to deal with later. Sonny leaned over Mairi, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words to her. Should I fetch my good sister? Once again, I was at a loss as to what to do, and felt the urge to bring William's ma to help. Sonny tilted her head.
Let's see how she progresses.
'Twill be dawn soon. William comes along first thing of a morning. I can send him back for his ma if needed.
That sounds like a grand idea.
Sonny's voice was serene. Mairi seemed encouraged, and weathered the next labour pains stoically. I cringed and fretted, me who'd seen men maimed and mortally wounded, wishing I could take her pains upon myself. Suddenly it occurred to me I was going to see my burn. My breath shortened, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. This was a boon I never looked for. I knelt at the other side of the bed and took Mairi's hand. You're doing grand, Nass, just grand. I glanced at Sonny and caught her eye. She gave me the sweetest smile, reassuring and triumphant all in one.
I wasn't sure she would burst the bairn in time for you to see him. I cannae let you linger beyond morning.
Her rejoinder was wistful, but I was too overcome with gratitude to begrudge her the constraint. Mairi tightened her grip, her eyes boring into me.
You aren't staying.
My whole body deflated, losing its triumph as if I'd been punched in the gut. I tilted my head, beseeching her to understand. I kenny, I told you I couldn't stay. Her eyes welled with tears the birth pains hadn't forced from her.
But you also said you couldn't stay past nightfall. When you returned after dark, I thought...
I was given a few hours more, but only a few. Mairi glanced at my hand, where her fingers stumbled across the cut from my dagger the day before. It hadn't bled, but neither had it healed.
Your poor hand? What did you do?
Puzzlement over the long gash gave way to dawning understanding.
You didn't bind it, nor have it sewn closed, yet it doesn't bother you.
She offered me one last chance to recant my story, to tell her 'twas all a mere jest, and I wasn't a ghost. Silence thickened. I rubbed her palm with my thumb, turning my hand to hide the wound. I'll bleed nae more, Mairi. As a ghost I canna eat, and I willna bleed, but I will love you forever. I brushed her hair back from her forehead. All I wanted was to be certain ye and the bairn were well, and I must take this moment to tell ye to leave here as soon as you're able. A choked sob escaped her.
Don't tell me such things. Tell me of how you wanted to grow old with me. Raise our bairns. Teach them to swim and hunt and fish.
She could no longer control her tears, and neither could I. I can think of no one I'd rather grow old with, Mairi. You're the perfect half of my life. My heart has ever been in your keeping. Remember that when you think of me. She crawled into my arms, and we huddled together. I finally gathered the words that needed telling. Mairi, love, listen to me. After this battle, things will not be safe for those who supported the Jacobite cause. Even ye and the bairn will be in danger. I want you to promise you'll move in with my brother's family until ye and the bairn can travel. Things will be hard, Mairi, and many will flee to America. I want ye to be among them.
Why America? Our family's here.
I sighed. I canna discuss it with ye. America and places like Canada and Nova Scotia will be good places for Scots looking for new homes. Please trust me, Mairi. Pain flickered across her face, and she squeezed my hand hard.
I didn't want to go someplace. Oh!
She leaned forward with the force of her contractions. They came one on top of the other, scarcely giving her time to draw a breath. I sent Sonny a sharp look. Is this right? Sonny's attention was on Mairi, murmuring encouragingly to her as she laboured. Turning back to Mairi, I let her grasp my arm as she pushed. Her nails bit into my skin, but the damage was of no importance, and I didn't feel the pain. Sonny gently shoved the blanket aside and pushed Mairi's shift past her knees. Her voice rang with excitement.
Oh, the bairn is almost here.
Grin stretching from ear to ear, I grabbed Mairi's hand. Good lass, just a wee bit more. She gave a hoarse bark of laughter and furrowed her brow in concentration. Her face flushed red with her exertion, and she bit her lip. She groaned with the effort of it, then gave a sudden gasp of relief.
Look.
Sonny slowly raised her hands. A very wee bairn cradled in them. His birth-reddened skin gleamed in the firelight, and his face was puckered in a grimace. She held the bairn out to me. A deep reverence stole my breath as Sonny placed the babe in my arms. She grabbed a piece of linen and began wiping him down, and it was a lad, a wee lad, but perfectly made. Mairi raised up on her elbows, peering at the tiny bundle. I placed him on her belly, and she stroked his head, tears in her eyes. The cord connecting him to her pulsed with life, and after a minute or two, Sonny took a piece of twine and bound it twice, a few inches apart. She handed me a knife, and with a slight tremor, I cut the cord in two. I gently moved the bairn to the crook of Mairi's elbow. She gazed at him, wonderment lighting her sweet face.
He's so small.
He came early, but he's a braw lad and will thrive. She smiled contentedly. Suddenly, her gaze jerked to mine, and she gasped. I grabbed the bairn from her, and she bent almost double, caught in another contraction. Rattled, I stared at Sonny.
Twins!
I blinked. Twins! Mairi peeled and strained. A few minutes later, I held another lad in my arms. His eyes squinted at me, and he waved a tiny fist in the air. A light fuzz of red gold hair dusted the crown of his head. Me. He looked just like me. I turned to Sonny, tears in my eyes. This, I told her, working the words around the lump clogging my throat. This is what I came back for. Chapter 15. I lay propped on one elbow on the bed next to Mairi, the bairn's cradle between us. Fascinated, I watched as first one, then the other nursed at her breast. They settled quickly and dozed, and Sonny swaddled them, following Mairi's directions. Mairi peered at Sonny.
Who are you?
Sonny gave her a reassuring smile.
My name is Sonsere. I was able to grant your husband one last day with you to see your care.
Mairi's eyes narrowed, troubled.
How did you do this?
Sonny cast a quick look my way, and I nodded. She knows I'm a ghost. Sonny turned back to Mairi.
I am a Muir witch, and my heart was filled years ago with the plight of a few ghosts I met as a bairn.
Mairi flinched and crossed herself, tucking the bairns a bit closer to her. Her pale cheeks flushed.
I am sorry. I didn't mean disrespect.
Sonny nodded.
But you are uncomfortable with a witch in your house. I understand. Think of me as a very young, wise woman.
Her calm manner and gentle smile seemed to relieve Mairi of some of her worry.
I thank you for bringing Adam here.
Mairi turned her face to me with a mournful look.
Though I didn't know how to let him go again.
Pale grey light framed the door and window, and I knew dawn wasn't far off. I tried to distract Mairi from her sorrow. What shall we name the lads? Mairi peered at the bairns, first at the one with red hair, Then the one was dark.
Mayhap we could name this wee lad after my brother who died when I was a lass.
Ian it is. I nodded with a smile, for the memory of a lad who'd garnered everyone's heart in the short life he'd lived. And the other? She stared at the burn for several long moments, and tears dripped down her cheeks and onto the fresh shift Sonny had helped her into after the burns had been burst. The moisture darkened the fabric in sad blotches, and I couldn't speak. I kissed the top of her head. She swallowed hard,
I would name this one Adam.
and I knew she finally understood. I cradled her in the burns in my arms, rocking gently back and forth. I sang a lullaby I'd heard Mairi humming during the month she was pregnant. Hush-a-ba birdie, croon, croon. Hush-a-ba birdie, croon. The sheep are gone to the silhouette, and the coos are gone to the broom, broom. And it's braw milking the kye, kye. It's braw milking the kye. The birds are singing, the bells are ringing, and the wild deer come galloping by. Hush-a-ba birdie, croon, croon. Hush-a-ba birdie, croon. The gates are gone to the mountain high, and they'll no be home till noon. My voice choked and trailed off. The light around the window had turned from dull grey to pale silver, and would soon be the gold of dawn. My gaze met Sonny's.
Are you ready, Adam?
I dinna care about Prince Charlie. I dinna want my final memory to be of him, and no words I could speak to him will ever erase the fact I will nae see my lads grow into men. She gave a solemn nod.
This is your boon, then? That your wife and bairns now have a chance at a full life?
Aye, 'twas all I ever wanted. I started to rise from the bed, my limbs incredibly heavy and dense. Mairi clutched my arm. Her gaze flew to Sonny.
Dinna take him. I can't do this without him.
Sonny frowned.
I am sorry, Mairi. There is nothing I can do. My bargain was for a spirit, and I must take him back.
Mairi glanced at the burns asleep in her arms.
If you need a life, take mine.
Mairi, no! I was aghast to think she would even think such a thing, and terrified that Sonny would grant their request. The bairns need their ma. You aren't thinking clearly. William will fetch his ma, and you'll have all the help you need. I sank back onto the bed and pulled her close. 'Tis nae your time to go. She squirmed free, and somehow I found the burns in my arms as she sat upright.
If what you say is true, the lads will need their da more than me in the coming days.
I shifted wee Ian in my arms to balance the pair, and stared hard into Mairi's stubborn eyes. Nay, lass, Sonny canna exchange my life for yours. I've already seen my last days on earth. Sonny's soft, clear voice interrupted.
I can. The bargain is for a life. It doesn't have to be yours.
Mairi shot me a look of triumph, stained by so much grief, it fair tore my heart from my chest. I tried to place young Adam in her arms, but she slipped from the bed to stand barefooted on the cold floor. She shuddered, but gave me a piercingly sweet smile.
You'll see them to safety. I know how much you look forward to their birth. You'll make such a wonderful da.
I shook my head, firming my face into a stern look as I gently laid the lads on the bed. Nay, 'tis nae your time. She shrugged, but the pain in her heart was written in the tremble of her lips and the hollowness of her eyes.
Women die in childbirth, Adam. 'Tis nae uncommon.
My jaw clenched. Ye will nae be one of them. Please, Mairi, dinna make our parting over hard. She turned to Sonny and lifted her chin.
I am ready.
Her shoulders shook, and I knew she resisted the urge to glance once more at the burns. No! I shouted, unheeding of the small cry from the bed, as I grabbed Sonny's upper arms. You will nae change the bargain. A peculiar smile crossed her face.
'Tis well met, Adam Gordon.
She tilted her head, her smile widening across her face.
Dinny fish.
Thunder crackled outside. No, 'twas inside the cottage. I turned to Mairi, but she was already at the bedside, cuddling the mewling bairn to her breast. I put an arm protectively about her shoulders and looked up to see a man dressed in 21st century clothing, something I'd seen enough of at the Culloden Visitor Centre, standing very close to Sonny. "You've had more than your share of warnings, Sonsore." He shook his head.
I gave my word, Uncle Wickham. You know me much better.
He sighed. "You're a soft-hearted lass, but I can see you haven't played this false." He glanced at Mairi and me, his bushy eyebrows meeting in a fierce scowl. "May they use their time wisely." And with those words he was gone. Sonny lifted her arms, and I waited for the stroke to fall. I brought to mind the feel of Mairi in my arms, of the soft touch of the burned skin, and their peaceful faces, the last things I would know in this world. Mairi set the burns down.
Take me.
She wobbled a bit on her feet. I picked her up with little effort and set her next to the burns. "Mary Gordon, I will nae stand for this." Turning to Sonny, I scowled. "I swear I will haunt your every step should you take my wife in my place, Sonsore." Sonny rolled her eyes, making vague, waving movements with her hands. I stared at the bruising apparent on one slender arm. She caught my gaze and flipped her hands to her sides, and the sleeves of her shirt fell to her wrists. Curiosity overtook my weariness. "What happened, lass?"
Nothing to concern yourself with. 'Twill be right as rain in a few days. I do, however, have others to see to. With 67 more of you to deal with, I didn't have time to linger.
She cast a look at the twins, and a look of intense longing crossed her face before she schooled it to a more serene facade.
"'Tis time to say goodbye."
Mairi lurched from the bed.
You can't take him. He is my life.
She glanced at Ian and Adam, then back at Sonny.
I would rather you give them the da they deserve.
Sonny sighed.
Mairi, I will nae be taking your good man.
Mairi gasped, and I gaped at Sonny. She turned her gentle gaze on Mairi.
You've shown a pure unselfishness in your love for him, as he has for you, and his lingering to help an innocent child when he knew 'twould keep him from a final hour with you speaks highly of his heart. 'Twas an unspoken part of the bargain I've made. He's now free to stay here, and though I would caution him against warning those here of things to come, today marks the day of the Battle of Culloden, and much will be revealed very soon.
I could scarce take in all Sonny said. At the mention of the battle, a strange unease settled over me, and Paul rose slowly to her feet, a mournful howl sliding from her lips. Coldness crept over me, just as it had not long after the battle had begun, and my life's blood stained the moor. Her other words struck me. I was free to stay. I blinked, afraid I dreamed, bewildered at the unexpected boon. "How?" Sonny laughed.
Give me a hug, then tend your pretty wife and bairns, Adam. I've a few more bargains to arrange. It gives me great joy to see you happy.
Excitement built in me as the enormity of my future dawned on me. Will the others be so fortunate? As happy as I was, I wanted each of my brethren to be as lucky. Sonny lifted her eyebrows.
Some will, others will choose a different path. But yours is now laid before you. Will you accept it?
I wrapped my arms around the wee witch and lifted her into the air as I spun her about. Yes! With another whoop, I set her back on her feet, puzzled at her frailness the full robe had concealed. Her eyes met mine, bidding me say nothing. Something was wrong, but she would not be telling me of it. Thank you, sonny. No matter your uncle doesn't seem to like whatever you've done for us, you've my deepest regard and thanks. She motioned to my family.
Take good care of them, Adam. Raise them to see the good in others, and to be strong and honourable Scotsmen. No matter where you decide to live, never let them forget their heritage.
Aye, they'll never forget. I stared at her. Nor will I. Green mist slipped from beneath her feet and billowed gently upward. It quickly enveloped Sonny, and in another breath she was gone. Emptiness settled over the room. There was no sound except for the precious breathing of my small family. Mairi looked at me.
What must we do to stay alive, Adam?
As the sun brightened in the sky, I racked my brain for all I knew of the days and months to come. 'Twas clear Mairi and the Barnes couldn't travel very far for several days, mayhap even a few weeks. As she recovered from childbirth and the Burns gained weight, I knew William's ma would help care for her. I myself could remain hidden until 'twas time for us to move my precious family to a new land. A place where we would not be hunted for our part in the war. A new land where the lads could grow to manhood with, God willing, both their ma and dad to care for them. A place where we would do more than stay alive. A place where together we would love and live. This has been Adam, The Ghosts of Culloden Moor, Book 11. Written by Cathy McRae. Narrated by Andrew McDermott and Jen McGurk. Copyright 2015 by Short Dog Press. Production copyright by Catherine Dodson.